and then I get upset. I'm just kidding, I don't get upset. Thank you. All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm Damon Klink-Scales. I'm the director of Startup Grind Austin. Thanks for coming. So Startup Grind, it's a global organization, and its purpose is to educate, inspire, and connect entrepreneurs all over the world. It's, let's see, I think there are up to 300 chapters, so it's a very global organization. It started in Silicon Valley many years ago, 6 or 7 years ago. And I think Austin's chapter has been around 3 or 4 years. I am the third director, and I started last summer. So anyway, glad you all are here. I'm glad Carrie is here. So a couple of things. So we have a couple of sponsors, so I just want to let you know who those are. Egan Nelson is a law firm, world-class counsel for startups. Where's Mark? Mark is around here somewhere. Mark Nathan is here, and he's with the firm. So catch him if you're interested in meeting with them. And then Atlassian, it's just a software company that they have a huge installation at 3rd and Colorado. It's an Australian software company, but they have collaboration tools that are widely used in the enterprise. They're also one of our sponsors. Let's see, and also if you need to use the restroom, it's actually not in here, it's out in the main space of the Omni. You kind of just walk down this way and it's on the right. Trying to think of anything else. The basic format that we're going to follow is the fireside chat portion will happen now, and then I'll ask some questions and you guys will have a chance to ask questions too, which is a super cool aspect of this. Plus, we have this cool microphone that we're going to try throwing at you, and we'll see if you can catch it later on. And let's see what else. So, and then after that, we'll have a little bit more time, so we'll be able to hang out and chat with each other and chat with Carrie for a while longer after we're done. So, that's the basics. So anyway, we're going to get started, I guess. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
This is great. So I guess just to start off, so for people that don't know you, or to kind of catch up on your background a bit, can you tell us a little bit about kind of where you're from, where you grew up, where you went to school, things like that? Just
gosh, okay. Well,
taking you way back.
Actually, not an easy question for me. I have moved
25
times. So 25. And
okay,
can
we start with the first place?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to go through all of them, but I think I've lived in 3 countries. I think it's 11 states. And I can't remember how many major metros, but that's including moves within a city, so it is technically a little bit detailed, but sometimes I've moved back to the city 3 different times. So I was born in Boston. I mostly grew up high school, formative years, junior high and high school in Chicago. Went to Duke for undergrad, actually majored in biology, but it was a process of elimination after many other majors, and then immediately went into coding and knew I was going to business school. So eventually went to Harvard for business school. And most of my career, I guess, has been between Chicago, Philly, San Francisco, Seattle, Austin, Philly several times. So I've been a lot of places. I've actually also traveled to 54 countries and 49 states. So
holy smokes.
I know, I'm kind of a nomad.
How, so what's your connection to Austin? Because I know you've been here and gone away and kind of come back. What's your story, or what's your love affair or whatever with Austin?
I was running a company focused on girlfriend getaway travel, which was really about destination travel to cool places that groups of women would come, and this was in 2009-ish. And I've been to Austin a couple times, and I thought, that's one of the good destinations. I should go check it out personally to kind of prepare our trip plans for here.
Research.
Yes, research. It was a lifestyle company that was a lot about me getting to go to these different destinations. So I came back, I'd gotten a job actually offer from Dell in business school, so I'd seen Austin then, and I'd come back to see some family friends. But this time I got here and I thought, life is short, you can live anywhere. Why don't I just live in this cool place? I'm writing up all the cool things you can do and what women should do when they come on a trip, and I was like, I should just live here. And it was partly influenced by the fact that I was also living in Seattle, where it is rainy all the time, and I'm not good with gray weather. So I was a combination of, there's a tech scene here, it's a really creative place, and I got here and I really enjoyed and I literally just up and moved my startup here. and that was 10 and a half years ago or so. I did take a detour to Philly for 3 years to be the CEO of Dreamin Ventures, which is a startup accelerator, which we'll talk about. But it was always a temporary move, like kept the 512 number, kept stuff here, literally kind of didn't let a lot of people know that I had even moved, and would come back for anything that was kind of relevant, because I knew I wanted to come back and frankly lure Dreamin to have a location here eventually as well. So that was a work-related move, but it wasn't a move away from Austin. It was just a temporary hiatus.
Awesome. So you had it in mind. You were keeping it in mind that whole time.
I was.
So Dreamin. How did Dreamin come about, and what was your role there?
Yeah, so Dreamin, for those of you who don't know, was actually probably the third accelerator in the market. We don't, that's sort of the early days and weren't well documented, but we think Y Combinator was like 2005, 2006, and Techstars started 2006, 2007, and Dreamin was founded in 2008. And it was 3 serially exited founders in Philly who were trying to figure out how to give back to the next generation. I mean, this is pretty early in the sort of formation of startup ecosystems, and obviously the old school incubators that existed, but the people were trying to figure out, how do we mentor the next generation of startups? How do we give them the tools to make them more successful? And so those 3 guys were trying to figure out what was the right model for how they could help give back to the ecosystem, help Philly become more of a startup hub. And formed Dreamin after seeing the model of YC and Techstars, and at the time I think Techstars literally might have only been in Boulder, and YC was still doing Cambridge and Silicon Valley, but it was new, and so they created this model of a mentor-driven accelerator where you take the 6% common stock and give 25K and kind of give a bunch of resources and try to get the company in 3 months, where it might take them a year or 2 on their own to kind of sort of struggle along. And they had been running it for 2 years just in the summer, kind of as a nice, volunteer project on the side, thinking they wanted it to be self-sustaining, but it wasn't going to be some really big thing. And they had some really successful companies coming out of it, and realized that it could be something real, but that they didn't have the time to do it. And so one of the founders of Dreamin was a guy I'd been the COO of one of his startups before, and brought me in really to take Dreamin to the next level. So that's when I was living in Austin, realizing that the recession was going to kill my travel startup, and so shut down my startup. Well, didn't shut it down right away, but tried to kind of keep it alive for a while, but moved to Philly to help turn Dreamin into something bigger. So I came on board, and we grew Dreamin from a single summer Philly program to programs in Philly, New York, Tel Aviv, Baltimore, and Austin, where we were running multiple cycles a year, and then raised a $20 million fund to do follow-on investing in the companies, and then did a whole bunch of different programs focused on different verticals like ed tech and health tech, but also a program focused on minority entrepreneurs, and then eventually one focused on women entrepreneurs. So really, took Dreamin to the next level over the course of 5 years, and at some point got named the CEO. I was sort of running it all from the beginning, but I don't remember exactly when that happened.
And you were telling me that back then it wasn't common for these accelerators to have a fund. That was
not in the early days. I mean, this was all an evolution. Techstars didn't have a fund then either. I think they did start raising funds to do follow-on investing before we did. But yeah, all of that was really new. I mean, we were all figuring out the business model. At the beginning, I think you were really raising enough to run each class. So we would raise enough to pay 25K to each of the 10 teams that came into the cycle, and to pay for the demo day and some pizza and my salary kind of, my subpar salary divided by 5 or whatever. And so it was very scrappy entrepreneurial, and it was literally sort of hand to mouth, the way you would do sort of a friends and family round, over and over. And so it was partly to help fund the program in a more sort of long-term way, but really also to realize that we were getting early insight into which companies were going to potentially be successful, and that we ought to be leveraging that insight to get a better return. But also realizing that it was going to be a long time before we saw the returns of the 6% common stock on companies that aren't just seed, but they're pre-seed and maybe pre-seed. And so if a seed stage fund has a 10-year horizon, but really has 2 one-year extensions, and really you're not going to have an exit for that long, we weren't going to see any returns coming back to fuel the business to grow it for a long time. So really had to rethink, how do you make the accelerator sustainable so you can keep running it while you're waiting for those things to happen.
And when did you come to Austin as the Austin version of the Dreamin Accelerator?
That was probably 2013. So it was right whenever Josh was actually opening up upstairs. So at the time, Capital Factory for the couple years prior had been a similar model. Specifically, it was a cohort-based, calendar, like X number of months, all the companies come in at the same time model, probably similar economics, but it was the Austin version of it, maybe a couple fewer companies. And Josh had gotten the space upstairs to turn Capital Factory into a year-round co-working space along with accelerator programs. And so I knew from the rumor mill that Techstars, who was doing the cloud program down in San Antonio, was thinking of expanding to or moving to Austin, and I wanted to get here first. And so I moved back to Austin. I think it must have been December 2012 to start the first program in 2013, and actually approached Josh to actually run it in Capital Factory. So they were still literally drilling stuff over our desks and like sweeping up sawdust and things when the first cohort of 15 Dreamin Austin companies came in. But it was really thoughtful and indicative of the way Josh runs Capital Factory to say, how do we become the ecosystem for everybody and not just think about, well, we're an accelerator and they're an accelerator, so we're competitors. We came in and actually did it out of the same space, and it was really collaborative, which is really the really important differentiator of Austin's startup scene relative to a lot of the other startup scenes, is that it is really about rising, all the boats rising, not like fighting each other for resources, which is pretty cool and unique, and you guys should be excited that you're in this space.
Kudos to Josh. I agree.
Indeed.
And I want to get to the backstory of where you are today, but you are now...
Oh, by the way,
yes.
When it was announced that I was moving Dreamin to Austin, that I was coming here, a couple people from the local community reached out to me, like, out of nowhere, and Damon was, like, the first person to be like, hey, my name's Damon, you're coming to Austin, like, tell me who you are and what you're all about.
This is amazing. I didn't realize that I was one of the first people.
It totally was.
But
so thank you for
awesome.
welcoming me back.
That's great to hear. So what I was going to say about your current role, now that you are a general partner of True Wealth Ventures, I want to kind of walk backwards to say, like, how did you get to this point? Were you always thinking, I'm going to be a VC? Or what? Like,
totally not.
Walking backwards, like, how did you get to the kind
and
of
maybe
fun?
almost begrudgingly, no, a VC.
I know there's a lot of formative steps along the way, including Dreamin and all of that. So could you kind of walk us through the logic?
Yeah, I mean,
how you wound up here?
So it's kind of funny. I was mentioning this to Damon the other day, but like, I don't know if you remember, like in kindergarten or like third grade or whatever, and your teacher would give you an assignment, like, where do you see yourself in 10 years? That was literally the most painful assignment to me ever. Like, I'm not someone who had this like long-term goal. It was all steps along the way. I literally could not conceive of what I wanted to be. And so my career has really followed that path of serendipitously deciding, like, what's the next interesting thing I want to do. Like, I definitely have a rule, like, it needs to scare you and you need to feel like, am I actually capable of doing this, so that you're growing, but it hasn't been like, I have this goal that I'm working towards. And so, I really felt myself more of an operator. In fact, I had accidentally taken a job right out of business school as a consultant at McKinsey, and I was doing a lot of PowerPoints. And I really didn't enjoy that. And I lasted 3 months. I mean, I literally took a job that was supposed to be like the job for the next 2 or 3 years. And I was like, I have to actually get shit done during the day. Like, I can't just pontificate about stuff and put it in a PowerPoint. And so, when I was running Dreamin, I had the cool role of getting to run the company of Dreamin and its expansion and figure out the business model for bringing in these partnerships and growing us to new cities. So I got to be an operator. Then I got to do the super fun part of, in each cycle, actually meeting with all the companies and giving them advice and connecting them and like figuring out how to move them to the next level or helping them figure out when there wasn't something there. And then I also got to raise, it was a lot of jobs at the same time, but got to raise a fund and then become an investor. And that was really because it was the right business model for the accelerator. It was an entrepreneurial thing that said, what do we do with this company and how do we make money off of it? And so the answer was, we need to raise a fund. So we went and like figured out how to raise a fund. So at the time, there were 4 of us at Dreamin, and all 3 of us had come from operator side and business side. And while I had an MBA from Harvard, and so like I knew empirically like the concept of venture and how it worked, I certainly had never thought about like, how do you go raise a $20 million fund and what are the economics, et cetera. And so we did lean startup kind of customer discovery, sort of approach to pitching a fund. So we're like, maybe it's a $50 million fund, maybe it's a $70 million fund, maybe it's a $20 million fund. Who might our target investors be? And like kind of went out and figured out how to raise a venture capital fund because it was the right thing that Dreamin needed, that was the right business model, not because any of us were like, I really want to be a venture capitalist. And so that's sort of how we ended up where we were, but I didn't have to, in that role, give up the operator side because I was also the CEO of the company. And so was doing that for 5 years, and in the process of doing it, one of the things that came about, which is probably a separate train of thought, but was that we ran this program focused on women-led companies. And around the same time, my business partner in True Wealth Ventures, who's the founder, Sarah, was basically in the process of deciding that she wanted to raise a fund, and that fund was going to focus on women-led companies. And I was telling the story to a couple of women earlier, but the way we met was that she, as she was getting re-engaged in the venture community here to figure out what her place was and who she was going to raise money from, she was thinking back to the fact that she was a VC back in Silicon Valley about a decade ago and used to go to all kinds of networking events that were like sponsored by the law firms or the banks or whatever, and had never met a woman in venture capital. And so as she was talking to people about the scene, she's like, I've never met a woman like in this entire industry, and I was actually in it and going to events. And around the same time, 2 people in the community here were like, oh, you should meet Carrie. There's one. Like, one. Like, there's one in Austin who's in VC. And as far as we know now, we're literally the only 2 women GPs in venture capital in the state. There are women in private equity, and there are women in, sort of non-investing roles. But we think that we're literally, and we'd love to find out if there were more, but there's a mezzanine debt firm in Dallas, and there's some women, in institutional LPs. But we met because we're literally the only 2 women in VC. So anyways, I'm making this a longer story than it should be, but that's how Sarah and I got connected. And so I really just started advising her because I loved what she was doing. She's about to go raise a $20 million fund. It's focused on women entrepreneurs. I have just raised a $20 million fund. I have a program focused on women entrepreneurs, and so I just had a lot of insight. And it's pretty hard to raise a fund, if not impossible, as a single person. So she was going to go out and try to do that, and I was trying to be an advisor. But it was really resonating with what she was doing and the opportunity, the financial opportunity for the fund. So then I decided to be a venture partner because I could dip my toe in. But it actually took me a really long time to realize if you commit to being a VC, it's at least a 10-year commitment. Because you've got this 10-year fund and you're accountable, you're the fiduciary of these other people's money to carry it through. And so I had never had a 10-year long job before. And frankly, you also, much like with you guys and your co-founders, you really need to know that this is a person that you want to be in this with for that 10-year period. And so I really struggled for a long time with wanting to give up, that I wasn't going to be an operator anymore, and that I was really going to be a venture capitalist. Oh God, aren't venture capitalists horrible people? And do I want to be one of them? And aren't I more of an entrepreneur? And all of that. And so it was a 9-month process of advising Sarah before I realized that this was just an amazing opportunity and we really were onto something. And then it changed my life. Yeah.
Awesome. Yes, no, that's exactly the story I was hoping you would tell. Actually, it's not long-winded at all. So what were some of the reasons why you decided to found a women founder-focused firm?
Well, I don't want to take the credit for that because it's actually Sarah's focus area that I agreed with,
right.
Because I'd been focusing on a similar issue.
How did you get to that point of deciding, the world needs this and this is what we're going to do?
Yeah, so I'll give a little bit of Sarah's story that I can throw in, sort of why it resonated with me too. But Sarah was at the time an executive at a Fortune 500 company, AMD. And had come from mechanical engineering, so she was a PhD in mechanical engineering and had worked in semiconductors and VC and beer and all these industries that were really male dominated. So she frankly had never really noticed that she was a woman. She's got 2 boys. It was just, she was always in rooms that were all dudes, and it was sort of irrelevant. So she got asked to be the executive sponsor of the Global Women's Forum at AMD because she was apparently the only woman who was a vice president who had any technical or operational experience. And if she wasn't going to do it, the thing was going to shut down. And she literally was like, bullshit, sorry, you're just trying to get me to volunteer for this role, but there's other women who could do it. And looked at the org chart of this 15,000 person company, and literally the only other women that were in senior positions were in marketing or HR. And if this is a technical company and you're going to be representative of all the women at the company, you need to have that credibility and technical experience. So she took the role, a little bit begrudgingly, and said, well, why does it matter that I'm a woman? Like literally, why is that even important? And so started as an engineer doing research around like, what does it matter that I'm a woman, and what assets does that bring, or what problems does that bring? And actually started seeing all these data points that showed that when there is more diversity in senior leadership in companies, and frankly in teams anywhere, that gender diversity leads to better team performance, and in companies, financially, it leads to significantly better financial performance. And we're not talking like a little bit. So McKinsey did a study in 2010 called Women Matter, Gender Matters, and it basically showed that the top quartile of companies in their database of mostly Fortune 500 publicly traded companies who had the most women in senior leadership had 40-something% higher return on equity and 56% higher EBITDA. And at the time, her company was like trying to squeeze out like 1% more margin or operating margin. And here's a lever that could give you 56% higher operating margin. It was the most powerful business letter she'd ever seen, and started saying, well, what do we do in my role, to try to get more women into, senior leadership in this company, et cetera. And of course, moving a company of that size is moving a battleship. And so you've got to like build the pipeline and turn over the C-suite and turn over the board, and that can take a really long time. So at the same time, she'd always been looking to get back into venture capital and thought, well, this same thesis could apply in venture capital, but you could decide like today, you're just gonna, only invest in companies that have a woman, and therefore, have these higher returns. Because there's similar data that a study funded by the Kauffman Foundation found around VC-backed companies that have women leaders. They have 35% higher returns, 12% higher revenue growth, using a third less capital. So it's really a business thesis that there's a massive disconnect because there's these great financial outperformance characteristics, and yet, depending on all the different studies you read, somewhere between 2% and 7% of dollars are going to companies with a woman CEO at the VC level. And so they're outperforming significantly, but they're getting overlooked. So, hey, business opportunity. And so, the data is really compelling. And I literally was working on a program at Dreamin that I had called Dreamin Athena, where we had gone and gotten funding from the Pennsylvania Department of Economic Development to run a program specifically focused on women entrepreneurs, because if tech, it doesn't have great representation of women, accelerators certainly at the time were even worse. I mean, there were a lot of late night, cans of Busch Light and pizza, in a city where you didn't live, and it just was not an environment that was conducive. Most women start businesses later in their careers, and so they're actually, when they're in the mode of, being married with, mortgages and kids and all those things, and so they weren't really prone to being in these accelerator environments. So we wanted to figure out how to build an accelerator that was more, sort of accessible for women to join, but also started to help them address some of the things they were going to face, like only 2% of venture dollars go to women, and so what might they do to mitigate that, or to what might we provide to give them pathways to their startup being more effective. And so given that I was already, among a bunch of other things at Dreamin, focused on trying on this opportunity with women-led companies, and Sarah was actually focusing on that as a business opportunity, it really just resonated that it was an area that we actually both had a lot of passion for, and also saw some great business opportunity, data-driven business opportunities to invest in.
So armed with that data, then you just decide to start this fund. Now you have to go raise money from limited partners, right? Talk us through that. How hard was that to do, to convince people to give you the money? It was y'all's first time together as founders together, and so just can you give us a little sense of what it's like to try to raise money at that next level?
It's hard. So we got told it was going to be hard, and we were like, oh, we know it's going to be hard, but we're like type A driven people, and like, Sarah's got a PhD from Berkeley, and I've got an MBA from Harvard. We're not like slackers, like we'll go do it. And we started doing it, and we're like, oh, it's just hard work. Okay, great, we got it. Like we had to like set up a CRM, and we had to follow through, and we had to have like a target market, and we had to do all this stuff, and we were working super, super hard, but we're like, you just have to do the process and it'll work. And then we kept doing it and doing it and doing it. We're like, oh, it's really hard. It's actually really hard. And for a couple of different reasons. It took us 2.5 years. And so a fund can take 1 year to 2 to raise, and a first-time fund can take up to 4+ years to raise, or frankly, a huge percentage of them just don't raise the fund. There's a lot of failure out there in raising a fund. And some of it is just like you're stuck with similar chicken and egg dynamics that you guys as startups face of, I need money to build a product to get traction, and I need, funding to get the money to raise it. You're just stuck in this chicken and egg. So we have a similar issue because, institutional investors and other kind of savvy investors want to see that you've already raised a fund and spent 10 years and shown that it actually has results and you actually have an exited track record before they actually want to invest in you. But you can't do that unless you've actually, been at a firm for 10 years, and they want you not only to have done that, but if Sarah and I had done that independently, Sarah at Fremont Ventures, where she used to be an associate, and me at Dreamin, and we'd waited the 10 years it would take to get returns, and then we joined together, that wouldn't even count. Because Sarah and Carrie have never worked together with this thesis on this kind of thing. And so it's estimated, so somewhere between 6 and 8% of venture capital partners today are women. But if you take out roles like the operating partners or the CFO or the general counsel, et cetera, and you look at which women partners are actually making investment decisions, it's estimated to be about 1%. So the chances that Sarah and I would both be at one firm together, working there for 10 years until we had great exit returns and then could spin out and go, we don't want to have our cushy job at that existing firm, we want to start a new one, and then have a track record together, is basically zero. And so we're never going to have the criteria that it takes to get that kind of investment. Which means, and by the way, no first-time fund ever gets investment from institutional investors anyways. And so you're just in this mode of like, how do I find someone who's going to take a chance on me based on the other things I've done in my life, and Sarah based on the other things she's done, and the thesis that we have, and that's what you're trying to find. And then it's a needle in a haystack, right? So for those of you who are entrepreneurs who are fundraising, you know that you have to target the investors who are interested in what you're doing. And if you're going after angels, and you know the exact problem we have, now we're going after family offices, but they have similar dynamics, i.e. they're not publishing on a website like, I have shitloads of money and I'd like to invest in you. You have to find them, and you don't know who's really qualified. Like, you get introduced to a high net worth individual, you can't ask them beforehand, like, but do you really have like $10 million, and are you like in a position to give away like $250K to like a new investment opportunity? And so you have lots and lots and lots and lots of coffee meetings, half of which are with people who are like, oh yeah, I don't have anywhere near that amount of money to like invest in you. And so it's like a process. And now you've got to convince them that they've got to take a flyer on this, sort of new concept with new people who haven't done this specific thing before. So it's not unlike the process that you guys as entrepreneurs are going through. And I think that's super valuable for a seed stage fund to have done that exact same thing, because we feel your pain. And we really do understand the process and what it takes. But the other thing is you have to gather, all that momentum up into, okay, you want to have a close, and so you've got to get those people to like write that first check and get them in and figure out how to orchestrate a sense of urgency and make people feel like there's a fleeting opportunity, whether that's true or not, and all those orchestrations that the gamification of getting a close to happen on the fund. So I could go on about it forever, but that's kind of the difficulty.
But I am wondering, for anyone that is fundraising, like, do you have any tips for like process things that you did that helped you make it work? Like you said, there was a process that you had to follow to do the work, so to speak. Like, what would you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, having a CRM and really actually being disciplined. I mean, what's super ironic about raising a fund, and it's probably true for entrepreneurs too, but to some extent, although the CEO does have to be good at sales no matter what, even if they're not the sales CEO, but we have to get really good for 2.5 years at selling, so that we could then actually be really good at choosing investments and helping companies move along, which are completely different skill sets. And maybe not totally rational that we have to be really good salespeople in order to raise a fund to go do something else that we're supposed to be really good at. But you can't do it if you aren't. And so not only using a CRM and holding ourselves accountable too, we gotta have like this many calls a day, and like we really need to like follow the pipeline and follow up with people X number of times and have those painful, like, gosh, we've sent them 7 emails. Are we really going to send them an 8th? Because the 8th sometimes is the one that, until they say no, yes, you keep sending them that email. Until you get an overt no, you keep, and then sometimes you're literally cringing inside, like, I cannot believe I'm sending this person yet another email. They've never responded. And some of those people at our last close were like, oh, hey, here's our check. Like, we haven't talked to you in like 2 years. Like, I thought you hated us. And they were just waiting for the deadline or whatever, right? So I think, literally having a CRM, following a process, learning to close, asking for the close is really important, and it's painful if you are not naturally a salesperson. So we had to coach each other on when we didn't do it well or that we needed to do it, and kind of hold each other accountable to making sure we weren't losing, not doing that. And I think the other key thing for us was really trying to create these events around which, there were deadlines drove almost everything, whether they were like literally completely arbitrary or not. But we had to create a sense of urgency to get into the first close. And so we applied for a federal grant. And with that grant, we needed to show matching funds. And, it was something emotional to connect people to, like, oh, I want to help them have this win. And by the way, if they have this win, they're also going to get $250K that's going to help the company move along with it without being dilutive, move the fund along. And so we use that as a trigger to get the first investors to fall. Because there's basically, if it's a 2.5-year fundraising process, there's literally no financial advantage for you to invest at month 1 versus month, 36 or whatever. So if you're smart, you just wait and you go, let's see if Carrie and Sarah pull this off, and I'll be the last money in and I'll have the exact same benefits, but I'll get to have seen how they worked over 2.5 years. So we had to really find the people that were like emotionally attached to what we were doing and really like sort of wanted to bet on us, and then get them to be tied to this idea of let's help them win this grant, and like we'll write a letter of intent to get in at that first day. So we used that as a tool to get the first investors in, and then they became spokespeople to help get the next investors in.
So did you sort of break the 20 million down into different chunks, or was it purely this?
Yeah, sure.
I mean,
we had all kinds of orchestrated plans.
Got to be in the first 5, because.
But so you could try to do that financially, and some funds do, right? They actually charge interest, or you earn interest or whatever. The accounting drama that you then would have to handle for the next 10 years of like people coming in at different dates and having different earnings, et cetera, really from all the advice we got from others makes it not worth it. So you could use those tools, but they would sort of burn you later on, and especially with a $20 million fund, by the way. Someone asked me earlier how big our staff is, and I was like, me and Sarah. And it's going to be me and Sarah for like the next 4 years. And so we're doing, we have some obviously service providers like accounting firms and law firms or whatever, but we're going to bear the brunt of all that busy work, and so you have to figure out how to be efficient, and that was not going to be it.
So, as you are now a venture capitalist, you have all these things to do. You have a very busy schedule, but you also want to help the community. You have these different touch points with the community. So I'm wondering, like, how do you make yourself available? How do you balance the time between doing your job versus helping others along the way and helping build women up? And I'm just wondering, like, what are some of the things that?
Yeah, so we've had to create some tools because honestly, I was joking with some of the women I was talking to earlier that once we started, we're doing this fund focused on women, every single person we meet is like, I know a woman, like I know a really great high school woman, and she's going to be an awesome entrepreneur someday. And I could literally fill my entire schedule with the request. I mean, I'm not even being joking by using the word literal, like literally fill my entire schedule with the meetings that people send me to be like, you need to meet this awesome woman. And honestly, my job is to find women whose companies fit our investment thesis so I can invest in them and then sit on their boards and help those companies be successful and exit. And that's what's going to take, now that we're done fundraising, 99% of my time. But we do want to help woman A, who might not be a good prospect for our fund now, but her second company might be, or just to sort of support the community in aggregate. So what we've tried to do is figure out some tools where we can sort of allocate that time more specifically. So, for example, I offer 2 hours of office hours I mentor a Capital Factory, I mentor a Galvanize, like I do all those kinds of, if there's events like that, I'll open up time. And so not every company that signs up for that is going to explicitly fit our fund thesis, and that's fine, that's part of it. But I also just have 2 hours, like totally open office hours once a month at Houndstooth, where literally anyone can sign up. There's no screen. It's, I don't ever have to say no. I can say, yes, the next time there's an open slot on my office hours, that half hour is yours. And I'm happy to try to make connections for those people or give my perspective, and that allows me to feel good about not ever saying no. I just say yes when. And then the other thing Sarah and I try to do is be really explicit on our website and our Twitter feed about where we're going to be speaking at events or judging in panels or whatever, so that if all we can get is 10 minutes of time, but it's the 10 minutes before or after the thing, we will be in that place. And so we publish it on our website and encourage people to come, and we try to really be available before and after these kinds of events to have those short little conversations just to see where we can be helpful. So that's how we've kind of gotten discreet around being able to be helpful, but also like literally have the time to try to do our jobs. Try to have the time.
And you were telling me your website has an application form right there on the site.
Yeah. So one of the key. So
about?
I was at an event at EarthX Dallas last week, and there were like 4 old traditional like family office VCs on the stage. And the question was like, how do you find deals? And each one of them was like, oh, I only look at deals that come to me from somebody that I already know. And I wanted to throw stuff at the stage because all that does is just create this self-fulfilling prophecy of the people who know the people are the people who get the funding. And I think it's, frustrating in aggregate anyways, but then for women, I think it's one of the major contributors to the fact that only 2% of dollars are going to companies with a woman CEO. If 1% of VCs, making investment decisions are women and they're not in the networks of the dudes who went to prep school together and play golf together or whatever, they don't know the guys to get the intro to those guys on the stage. And therefore, there's not even anyone looking at their business. So while it is always helpful to have a reference, and if I get an email from someone I know, it's going to give me credibility, we 100% look at every deal that comes over our website and try to give it the same preliminary screen we would give anything else because we don't want to be cutting off access to anybody. So that's a really important part, I think, of not just our approach, but as companies are thinking about, like, how do we get more women in our hiring process? Sure, getting a referral from someone that you know is a really helpful way to do screening. But if you can let that first screen, let anybody in, and then use that for your reference checks and your due diligence, but not to cut at the first screen, I think is a really great way to get more diversity in aggregate, not just gender, just different backgrounds, different socioeconomic status, whatever.
Absolutely. So in your firm, you have to be quite selective given the size of it. You're going to make, what I think you said, 12 investments or something like that. So I'm curious, what do you look for in a founder? If you're going to meet someone, what are you looking for?
Yeah, I mean, the first part is literally just does it fit our thesis, right? And so this is like a boring set of criteria, but we have a very defined thesis. And so the first layer of the thesis, obviously from this conversation, is about gender. And for us, the definition is there's at least one woman of significant decision-making authority on that founding or executive team. It does not have to be the CEO. It certainly shouldn't be all women. This is about the magic of gender diversity and not, just women. And so, that's layer one because we see the data that shows that those companies will outperform, but we're also focusing on markets where women are the primary customer, and therefore we think having that woman on the executive team means they'll have better visibility into that customer's needs for designing products and going to market, selling to and servicing those customers. So we look at the fact that women make 85% of consumer purchase decisions and 80% of healthcare decisions, and our genius thesis is there should be at least one woman on the team if your market is, majority women. And that shouldn't be that, earth-shattering, but 83% of venture-backed companies today don't have a single woman on the executive team, so it's apparently not as intuitive as we thought it would be. And so we are very focused on two markets where women are making the majority of buying decisions, and that's what we're calling sustainable consumer and consumer health. So we're very specifically focused on opportunities that improve human and environmental health, where consumers are generally sort of drawing they're not necessarily always the payer, because in health it could be your insurance company, for example, or in sustainable consumer it could be the ag tech that's bringing the more sustainable food to market that the women consumers are buying. But we really want to see somewhere that the women consumers got a really big draw on the success of that product coming through, and we're an impact fund. So that's very discrete, right? And that's just our thesis. It's not, other funds that are focused on women have very different theses, and that's where we're focusing. But then you're really looking at the things that most VCs would probably answer the same, which is, at the end of the day, it's about the team, and is this the team that's going to actually figure this out, whether the idea is right now, or they're going to balance that very tricky art balance between bullheaded stubbornness and like flexibility in response to the customer, right? They've got to be the one who's going to see through and like see that they see something that other people don't, but not so stubborn that it turns out they're just, sort of not seeing what's around them and responding to the customer. And that is hard to know the difference between. And it's definitely an art, not a science. But like, is this the team that's going to see the opportunity and have the perseverance and the skill set to figure it out? And so that's a very qualitative thing to assess. And it's one of those things I think you start to get better at over time, where you start to learn what the right questions are to ask. And so that's the first set of things is literally, you joke in real estate that it's location, location, location. In VC, it's team, team, team. And then I care about the rest of the stuff. But you'll note that idea is like way down on the list. It's team, team, team. And then it's like size of the market opportunity and like the strength of the pain, like is this a must-have pain versus a nice-to-have? And then it's things like, well, what's your solution for that, and how are you going to go to market, and what's the competitive differentiation, is it sustainable, and all those other kinds of factors. And those are all important, but if you don't have the first couple, it's like you don't even have the conversation about the rest of them.
So if I'm a woman and I want to be funded by you, I want to develop a relationship with you, how do I get your attention?
Yeah, so it's different now that we're not fundraising. So for a while we were fundraising with like 70, depending on the day, to 90% of our time, but still looking at deals. So once we did the first close on the fund, we were able to start investing, but we only had so much time available to look at new companies. And now really, most of what we're doing is either looking for new companies or helping the companies that we're already in, sort of move forward. And so our job is to look for new deals, right? So the good news is it might feel like it's hard to reach us, but if we're hard to reach, like we're doing our jobs badly, because we need to see as many deals as we can to pick the good ones. So literally submitting over the Dreamin is a way. It's probably not the preferred way, but
what I mean is besides getting it to you the first time so you're aware of it. Let's say you're not quite ready for them, or things kind of.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say that.
I was wondering what do you look for?
Yeah, so we are happy to, in fact, often prefer to meet a company early and then see their progress over time, because it's very hard to know. And like people want to know, like, well, what traction is enough? Like, how many users is good? And like for each different industry, who the heck knows? I don't know if 10,000 is good or 10 million is good, really. We sort of want to see traction over time, and the best way to do that is actually to see you over time. We also want to see how you respond to bumps and challenges along the way, how you respond to feedback, and whether you're mentorable, etc. And if you see you on a single point in time, and we try to we have to make a decision about whether we want to invest in like a month period, it's really hard to actually get that relationship building, the visibility into the entrepreneurs, flexibility, and how they respond to challenges and all those kinds of things. So the more we can meet someone early when they're not even fundraising yet, just to get to know them and know what they're working on, and then later they come back and say, hey, we're fundraising, how we said we were going to do this? Well, we did all this stuff and more, or how you gave us that feedback? Here's why we implemented, or here's why we didn't, but here's what we learned from it, or here's, just all of that helps build a relationship, credibility, trust. And in fact, our first investments, both of them, we had known for literally years before we invested in them. And it wasn't, that's not the reason why explicitly, but I bet you it had a lot to do with why we actually invested in Jeannie and Booth in the back of the room, and Yael Katz, both of whom we had the opportunity to see their progress over time. And I think it mattered a lot. And so you have to balance the first impressions, or sort of don't ever go away. And so that's just human nature. That's not we're intentionally assessing you at the first spot. So you don't want to come in when you don't even know how to position what you're talking about or whatever, or don't have your answers together. But if you come in and lay out here's what I'm thinking about, here's what I know, and here's what I don't know, and answer honestly when you just don't know something, but just sort of pitch, here's what I'm thinking about, what stuff would you want me to think about, what stuff do you think is important, and it's a dialogue. And then you come back later and you've got a lot of those answers and you've shown progress. I think that's helpful. But obviously, if you don't feel ready to, you have to balance when you're ready to actually have that initial meeting. And just know the difference between, hey, I'm not pitching right now, and sort of socializing this idea with you. And so it sets a different context for that initial meeting.
Awesome. So particularly for the men in the room, what are some of the challenges that women face as founders, as entrepreneurs? What are roadblocks they run into?
I think a lot of them are ones that they don't know are there, and that are really hard to actually communicate, and they get shown in the evidence and the numbers later, right? So I said that number that we look at a lot is that 2% of venture dollars go to companies with a woman CEO, only 13% of venture dollars are going to companies with at least one woman on the executive team, but women are starting businesses at 2 times the rate of men. So there's something broken there, the math doesn't work. It can't possibly be, and frankly, and then those companies that do have women outperform, so it's not that there are good companies, or that they're all not good companies, something's broken. So there's some sort of implicit bias, obviously sometimes explicit bias. But the implicit bias is actually more sort of tricky, because that means the investors who are exhibiting that or practicing that don't know it and aren't meaning to do it, right? So there was a study that was done by HBS, MIT, and Wharton that took the exact same business plan and had it presented by attractive male, unattractive male, attractive female, unattractive female. And not only does the attractive male get the most investment from these, investors, but the attractive female gets the least. So there's literally not only a penalty for being female, but there's a penalty for being an attractive female. So you've got these biases that are happening, and then it turns out it's not just male investors who act that way. The female investors also rewarded the attractive male and penalized the attractive female. Right, so you got the exact same business plan, and like societal, cultural biases are causing her to not get funded. So one of the things we found is that a lot of those things happen in the sort of traditional pitch process. So there's been a recent series of studies actually showed that not only do women get asked different types of questions than men when they're like, you're at a pitch competition and the judges get to ask questions, men are often asked what are considered promotional questions. And meaning that they're about like, how big can it be? How amazing are you gonna make this kind of thing? And the women are asked what are considered prevention-oriented questions, and they're about risk, like how are you gonna mitigate this? What are you gonna do if this goes wrong? Which tends to, the response then tends to be about how you're gonna mitigate that risk, and it kind of shrinks the opportunity in the minds of everybody in the room. So there's some great tactics, sort of a different conversation about how women can take a prevention-oriented question and turn it around to a promotion-oriented answer, which is a great sort of what can we do about this kind of thing. But that's happening all the time, but people don't know it's happening to them. Similarly, the words that investors tend to use about women. So let's say a woman is young and ambitious, but not yet, hasn't been a CEO yet. She's considered inexperienced. But the male who's in literally like maybe the exact same background, same sort of lack of experience and same, excitement about what they're doing is considered like a go-getter and ambitious or whatever. So they're literally being assessed differently for the same kinds of criteria. And so you've got to figure out then how you're going to know that that's happening and how you might put yourself in different situations. So we think, for example, not putting yourself in pitch competitions, but looking at other ways to make those connections, and have meetings in different settings can be helpful. So for example, on Kickstarter, like something like 38% of the deals that are funded are women-led, whereas this other number is 2% of VC-funded companies are women-led, so it's like more than an order of magnitude more happen in that setting. That doesn't mean Kickstarter is the right answer for everybody, but it means different settings are actually more conducive for women. So those are just a number of the things that are happening. The other thing, some of them are things women do to themselves, just the way we've been culturally, whatever the word is. This is something probably all of you have heard already because it's been circulating for a while, but the same thing sort of attributed to entrepreneurs. When women look at a job description, they sort of read it and see like, oh, I need to have something like 100% of the criteria in order to apply for this job. And I'm gonna get the number wrong, but like men look at it and they need like 30 or 40%. And they think, I can do this, and they apply. And similarly in negotiations, women are kind of thinking like, what am I worth? And they don't want to ask for too much. And men are like, shit, this is bullshit. I deserve way more than that. And those are things that we've been sort of taught as a culture to do, and that they're appropriate for us. So learning that you have that tendency and then taking steps to mitigate it. And there's books and tools and classes and things that can help you do that, but knowing that you have that potential risk because of the way you've been taught and the environments in which you've been in, and actually taking steps to make sure you don't do that to yourself. So for entrepreneurs, that first thing about sort of expectation setting can also often be reflected in women are really pragmatic with the expectations that they're setting. And that's one of the reasons probably that they outperform, because they've set these expectations that they know they can achieve. And that is great for operating, and that's great for like what your budget is for this year and your plan, because you're gonna achieve it. When you are selling in a customer environment or in a pitch environment for a VC, you are not selling the reachable 100% I know I can make this plan, you're selling the opportunity. And knowing that difference and knowing when to turn on which story is really important too. So those are a bunch of things I think people need to look out for. Both things that we do to ourselves and things that culture does to us.
Yep. All right, this will be my last question, and we'll go to the audience. What can men do to help women succeed as founders? If there are things that we can do, I'd love to hear.
Well, one of the things is show up to talks that are about women, because I can't stand when I tell all this stuff to women who are all nodding their heads because they know this. But really, honestly, knowing the numbers, like knowing that there's actually value in gender diversity is like literally step number one. It's like admitting you have a problem. But no, I think it's really valuable. And then also knowing that they might have these biases that they don't know. So there's, cultural, or there's like implicit bias training and it may or may not be effective, but starting to know, am I asking to, make sure you're asking the same questions or that you're sort of assessing people fairly using the same kind of thought processes, and knowing that you might do that. And by the way, women too, you also need to do, you're probably doing the same things, but making a conscious effort to make sure you're assessing those things fairly, I think is a good step. I think in hiring processes, and that concept of making the first screen not too hard and using sort of the other checks later on is really important. So in the NFL, they developed something called the Rooney Rule because they had no ethnic diversity in their coaches. So I think most of the coaches were the major coaches in the NFL were white. And they decided what they needed to do was at least have, I don't know how many candidates it was, but at least one candidate, let's say, for each coaching role had to be of, African American or other ethnicities, just to at least get exposed to them. And literally there was no requirement that you had to hire them or even put them through the hiring process further. You just had to have a more diverse candidate pool. And by doing that, they had a really big increase in the number of coaches who then all of a sudden were not white. And so Stephen Strauss is sort of circulating a similar concept in the startup ecosystem here, but to have that same kind of approach to diversity in your hiring processes. So it doesn't mean you have to, some companies are going to do it, they're going to set a quota for diversity because they get the value of it, gender diversity, ethnicity, etc. But even if you're not going to do that, just making sure you've actually solicited a diverse candidate pool, so you're seeing what diverse candidates look like, can be a big step towards starting to change the way you look at hiring. So I think that's another thing that could be really valuable.
Awesome. Well, that's great. Thank you very much. I'm going to pass it to the audience, but let's give Carrie a nice round of applause for this.
And he really means he's going to pass it to the audience. It seems like it's set up for disaster.
Is this working?
Yes.
All right. Get ready to catch this. He's got a question.
See, this is going to create like a, no one's going to want to ask a question. Okay, front row. Okay.
I really love an example.
You're supposed to use the microphone.
I really would love an example of where a female founder was asked a conventional question and how to turn that.
Anne, please come up to the stage.
I really have to go to the restroom.
Oh.
I'm here for you.
No, but so Jean Ann and Sarah did a practice round of this in front of the Fun Conference last week.
It was so much fun.
Oops.
It was so much fun. You have no idea.
Okay, so this is maybe not a preventative question, but a question you might get asked. How are you going to balance being an entrepreneur with taking care of your aging mother?
That is totally a prevention question. And my company does products for the elder market, including my 84-year-old mother. So it's totally appropriate and real and normal. And the answer to that was, everybody has to deal with life.
I mean, this is a normal thing for those of you who haven't been in this situation, if you're guys or whatever, but women often literally get asked how they're going to balance like having children and doing their job. Men are having the children too, and they never get asked how you're going to balance, having their children and doing their job. So Jeannie's because her product is literally focused on something she built to solve for her mother, she gets asked how she's going to manage being an entrepreneur with, dealing with her mother. Like, everyone has an aging parent at some point or another. So you've got to figure out how, do you make them realize that it's their question's inappropriate. But a prevention question could be, like, how are you going to mitigate the risk of not raising a Series B?
Oh, no. Let's do this one.
Okay.
I know you had this idea for your mom and everything, but who actually built this for you? I mean, what company made this happen for you? That's my favorite one. I get it all the time. I'm an electrical engineer with bachelor's and master's degrees in engineering. I sold one company to TI, another one to Apple. Was retired, came out of retirement to start this for my mom, and it drives me absolutely batty when I get this question. The answer to that is, so we have 14 folks in the company, and all but one, which is not me, is an engineer. We built all of this ourselves.
Yeah. So you're turning it around to show the capabilities of your company and not going down the path of, the negative side. Now you can literally go. Thank you for being on my front on stage. Okay. You want to throw the microphone to anyone else? Okay, go that way first because that's way too far.
Okay, I'm going to flip this on you. So if you are, you talked about how if there's men, they ask these kind of preventative questions. So, but if, on the other hand, if there's a female like you and there's men like me, what are the biases you see as a female against men?
Well, so we try to be really conscious of this actually because, our thesis is about the value of women, but we are not saying that there's not value in men. And in fact, it's funny because we've occasionally gotten the question like, well, isn't your fund sexual discrimination? And literally our bar is there needs to be at least one woman on the team, right? So that can literally mean there's like 7 men and 1 woman, right? So this is not for us about women versus men, but we have seen that our biases are, for example, men tend not to be the caretakers for their senior parents. There's actually data that shows that that's the case, that most senior care in this country is done by adult daughters and daughters-in-law, i.e. if you have a son, it's your son's wife who might be taking care of you when you get older. And so we start to think, okay, guys don't understand this market. Or for example, femtech, there's a lot of stuff that's been there have been a lot of markets that haven't been innovated on, with most of the investors being men, whether it's menstruation, pregnancy-related things, breast pumping, menopause, etc. Well, it's actually factual that there's been very little innovation there. But to assume that men can't understand the business opportunity isn't fair, right? Like I look at a trucking logistics company and I don't know a lot about trucking logistics, and it isn't because I'm a female, like I just need to understand the business opportunity. So it's not fair to assume that men can't invest in femtech and that men can't invest in senior tech, et cetera. To be fair, the data shows that a lot of them haven't to date, right? And so we think that bringing some fresh perspective who have literally personally experienced the problems, like Jean Ann personally experiencing this problem with her mom and not being able to figure out how to, sort of let her be managed remotely, will bring some fresh perspective to the table. But I think we've gotten to, we can often think that, well, men don't get it, they're not going to get it, they're not going to invest, and that isn't really fair. Yeah.
I just wanted to share a story. I've actually had a female co-founder for about 8 years now, and we used to run into a problem where whenever we would go into a room, usually a male disease or something like that, they would automatically come up and introduce themselves to me. She's the CEO, I'm the CTO. And what we ended up having to do was actually have her always walk in first and introduce herself first, and then just sort of introduce me to her. But it was kind of interesting because I didn't really believe that was the deal until I saw it with my eyes.
Yeah.
Even, if I walked in first, it's just always really awkward, you kind of,
Yeah, and it's important to figure out tools to help mitigate this, because I've heard other, male-female co-founder teams mention this before, and what they often do is literally say, I don't know the answer to that question, why don't we ask the CEO? And not in a blatantly rude way, but kind of in a, don't just answer it because they looked at you, because it can be pretty common to be like, they're looking at me, they want an answer, I better start answering, is to be conscious that you need to stop and pause and be like, actually that's a question for the CEO, or it's a question for the CTO, whatever role this, the woman is in, is to actually make sure you're consciously making sure when it's time to turn it over to her. So starting to literally incorporate these tools into a toolkit is sort of the answer to Damon's question about what can we be doing to help, is actually recognizing these things and creating tools to solve for it. Okay, in the back row.
So are you finding that the female-led companies that you're starting to recruit, are they any better in general at hiring diverse teams, or do you still have to coach them on it a little bit?
Our teams honestly are so small still that I think it's probably too early to know the answer on that. So I don't know. It's something that we're going to be conscious of because we're actually, so we have filed to be certified as an impact fund, and therefore we're actually accountable for sort of following on some metrics to make sure that we actually hold to being about diversity and hold to being about human health and environmental health. So over time, we'll be able to make sure that we're following through on those things, but it's probably too early for us to tell. I will say that, and for better or for worse, there's always an affinity thing around hiring. So the teams tend to have more gender diverse teams because the women are hiring people more like them. But that is actually antithetical to the point, which is that you should be hiring for sort of the diverse points of view and skill set. So that's not necessarily a good thing. All right, we might be fading out. Up here's one in the background.
So I'm running a business that's
So I don't think you should ever assume that you have to raise funding. So the question should always be, do I need funding? But it shouldn't be a goal to raise funding. And in fact, raising money from venture capitalists should be something that you only do because you really, really think you need venture capital money. We're expensive. And not always the right answer. And your business might not be the right kind of business for venture. So venture means I'm committing myself to now, only certain exits are going to be interesting to me. See, if you have a business that's still owned by the founders or friends and family, you could have a $10 million exit and be super happy with that exit. We are not going to be happy with that exit. We're going to force you to be looking for, let's say, a $70 million or $100 million exit. Other kinds of VCs might be expecting literally $1 billion exit. And you have then taken off the table the opportunity to have that smaller exit that would make you super happy. So you need to know that you need the kind of money that the business opportunity is big enough to get there, but that you also need that kind of money in order to grow fast enough or to build out what you need to build out. And so if you are running a cash flow positive business and the goal for you guys is getting met, you do not need to raise money. Or you need to figure out how much money do I need to raise, what is my exit plan? If you don't have an exit plan, if you want to run this business for the next 20 years, good for you, but you can't raise external capital unless you're going to find someone who wants a dividend type return, which is rare in the private markets. And so you need to make sure your interests align with the kind of investor that you're looking for and whether that you can actually deliver the kind of return and the timeline of return that you want. I have to have all my companies exited within the 10-year timeline of a fund, essentially. I have a couple extensions on that. That means the companies that I invest in year 4 have a really short window to actually get big enough and get sold to make my return happen in the time I owe my money back to my investors. And that is only gonna, that model is only gonna work for a certain set of companies. But the best kind of funding is customer revenue. Doesn't cost you, you don't have to give up anything for that. So I would always get that first if you can. One more and then you.
Hey Carrie, so nice to see you again.
Thank you.
Yeah, we spoke about my startup in New Orleans, and we help people overcome addiction through our app. And my question is about diversity. So, and this is kind of going back to your background about operating and how do you sort of think tactically and bring everybody's strengths together to be more than the sum of the parts. Now, as far as it applies to diversity, I think that can go in two very drastic directions. When you have diversity of thought, diversity of background, it could really devolve into, let's say, infighting and lack of consensus. And then obviously there's a type of diversity that we'd like to think about, which is, oh, okay, well, we hadn't considered these outside perspectives. Given that, do you have any sort of stories of best practices where you were able to take really, really, let's say, diverse, possibly even dissenting opinion and using that to deliver a better bottom line?
Well, my favorite answer to dissenting opinion is data instead of opinions. And so you use the diversity of thought to create a bunch of hypotheses, and then you go out and get market data to, prove or disprove the hypotheses. Meaning, you want those different opinions to say, well, maybe we should look at it this way, or maybe the idea is this. But if you find yourself in a room internally arguing over what you should do, it's time to stop and say, it doesn't matter what our opinions are, it matters what the market actually says, and go do some customer discovery or some, Google AdWords testing or whatever it is to find out actually what the customer wants. So the diversity of thought should be to frame hypotheses that you want to go test, I think, and then data actually answers the questions for you. It also just requires leadership. So leadership is a really tricky qualitative thing where a good leader is listening and hearing and taking the input of others, but then ultimately sort of, picking the direction and getting everybody on board with it, regardless if it was, the idea that they agreed with or not. And so that's a way different conversation for a different day about sort of how you actually train people to be better leaders. But I think leaders are good listeners, but they also know how to get people on board even if that person's idea wasn't the one that was chosen.
Thank you.
I think someone right behind you. Okay.
So I've been running my business for a little under a year, but I didn't have business background or anything like that. And so my question to you is, what resources would you recommend to new female entrepreneurs to grow our business knowledge and become more proficient in that CEO role?
Yeah, I mean, so you're lucky to be in an environment like Austin where there are a lot of resources, and I would say, take advantage of the pre-accelerators and the accelerators and the meetups and all those kinds of things that you can find. I think the Startup Digest email that comes out on Monday morning is a super useful resource because there's so much going on and you've got to sort of say, what stuff do I want to go do? I learned this lesson early on in going to South by is you also need to do the stuff that isn't the stuff that sounds fun to you that you're comfortable with, and you need to go to the stuff that you don't know anything about or you don't actually find interesting in order to fill the gaps. Because the first year I went to South by, I went to all the stuff that like an HBS MBA would go to that was like, you know, I don't know, like market segmentation or whatever, and I would get there and I'd be like, oh, I know all this stuff already, it's not useful to me. But if I had gone to something around like creative UX design, which, you know, I know nothing about, I actually would have learned something. And so figuring out, especially if you're looking to hire, et cetera, that you're going to things where you're going to meet people that are different than you, or going to have networks that are different than your network. So there's obviously a lot of value, for example, in we're meeting people through your networks, but when you're trying to hire or meet new people, it's way more important to meet people you don't know who are going to introduce you to a whole set of new people that you haven't met before. So I think those things, clearly also finding a group of people with whom you can have honest conversations about what's going well and what's not going well, because one of my favorite charts, you guys probably have seen this, but it's like what people think success looks like, and it goes up and to the right, and it's like what success actually looks like, and it's not just an up and down, it's like a squiggly line that goes up and down or whatever, and like that's also your emotional state over the course of running a startup. And you need to be able to resonate with people who actually understand it. So your partner or spouse or friends may be sympathetic, but they might not necessarily know how to be empathetic because they don't get it. So you need to find your people who can be empathetic with you, who you can also ask dumb questions of and that kind of stuff. And I think that those resources are here. There's some great groups, you know, whether they be women entrepreneurs or just entrepreneurs in general. I think that there's, you know, sort of reasons for both. I don't think you want to ever only be in a women-only sort of network. And then there's great books and things like that. I would, you know, highly encourage a couple books, which I can happily give people a list of later. But those are, you know, it's really getting engaged in the community and finding people who you can bounce off ideas with and talk to. Behind you in orange shirt, you have to pass the mic, even though it's not super working. Over here.
So I guess my question is, it can be twofold, but I'll just ask the one. What was it about the 20 million? Was there a certain metric that y'all were trying to reach about 20 million, or was that just what was available?
Some of it is a little bit going back to that sort of chicken and egg problem, like the dynamics of like the SEC and funding and that kind of thing. So you know when you're looking to raise like a Series A or a Series, you know, seed, et cetera, there's sort of like ranges that like funds kind of expect or want to put in, right? So you can't go raise it would be weird to go raise like a 250K Series A. Like that isn't really it, right? So that's not what's expected. With funds, there's a couple weird dynamics. You're only allowed to have 99 investors in a fund. But then you have to think about how much each investor might be willing to put in. So an institutional investor like the Rice Endowment might be willing to put in 10 million. They might write checks only 10 million and above, but they can't be more than 20% of a fund. So then you have to be a $200 million fund. But they won't invest in a first-time fund. So if you're going after angels, if I got any bigger than 20 million, but we can only do 99 investors, all of a sudden I've got to ask of them like 350K investments. That's a really big check to write. And if I'm trying to, as an angel, diversify my investments, and I only want to put X amount into just risky VC anyways, never mind all of it into the bucket of Carrie and Sarah, all of a sudden those people aren't out there that want to write 300 or 350K checks. So the math just starts to get to like, where can I get to? And then if you're doing early stage investing, you don't want too big of a fund because you'd have to write too many checks. So we're going to be, 20 million lets us write 250 to 500K checks in about 12 deals and reserve 2/3 of the fund to follow on into their Series A and Series B rounds. Let's say we had tried to raise like 100 million, but there's 2 of us. All of a sudden that means we have to invest in like 40 deals, and we can't like screen that many deals, sit on that many boards, you know, do that much, right?
Is the 99 because it's an S corp?
It's an S. No, it's not an S corp. It's literally related to funds, and after that you have to register as a public entity essentially. So it's an SEC regulation. Yeah. So there's a lot of math and sort of coming at it top down, bottom up, sideways, and like that sort of. So a lot of smaller funds are in that, you know, micro VCs are in that stage for that reason.
So how did you structure your fee and carry?
So just to tell everyone what it's all about, the way the venture capitalists get paid is we get a management fee on the assets under management, and in a small fund like ours that basically pays your salary, like, and your marketing and travel costs, etc. In a really big fund, like $1 billion fund, it gives you lots of money to do lots of stuff and pay people really, really, really well. And then we get paid a 20% profit essentially on the returns. So let's say a $20 million fund, we get as a small fund, 2% doesn't actually get you far enough. So we have a 2.5% management fee, literally just to pay Carrie and Sarah and pay like our office expenses and our travel. And so it's not really profit so much as just like keeping the lights on. Whereas in a $1 billion fund, that 2% can actually, you know, pay partners millions and millions of dollars, et cetera. So there's some incentives that are maybe misaligned as you get bigger. The 20% carry means that if we raise $20 million from investors, we first have to get $20 million in exits to pay them back, and then any returns we get on top of that, we take 20% of. So we don't get any share in the profits till our investors have gotten all their money back. So it makes us very aligned in wanting the companies to have big exits, because we really don't get the upside of being VCs until our investors have made all their money back. As firms get bigger and they get more successful, so let's say you're like Andreessen Horowitz Fund 5 or something, and you've got this great track record, you often no longer have to give the 20 million back before you start taking the profits. You can start taking the profits from day one, for example, and you're getting that percentage management fee on a way bigger amount, so all of a sudden you can start paying your partners $1 million or whatever else. So in big funds, it starts to get pretty crazy lucrative, and that's where there's a lot of attention being paid to the tax, the tax implications and whether or not those partners are aligned anymore around those profits. Because if they're making $1 million salary, how much do they really care about whether the fund's profitable or not? I don't know if that was your question, but it just starts to understand the dynamics.
And then what's the range of equity that you're looking for when you invest?
You know, we don't actually look at it that way. So some funds try to say, like in the first round, they're looking to get 20%. We're actually kind of modeling it backwards, and so we're really trying to see, can we get the kind of exit multiple that so we assume out of the 12 deals, X% of them are going to fail outright, and X% of them are going to give us our money back and a little on top of it, and then the top third, let's say, are going to actually give us a pretty good return that's going to make up for the ones that failed outright. So we're expecting in our fund, just given the focus of what we're investing in, not a single home run that's going to return all the fund, but sort of more base hits. So we think more of our companies, we don't have binary risk. We're not doing like biotech where a lot of the companies are just going to find out that the science doesn't work. So we're trying to invest in things where we know there's something there and it's operational risk. So it's not that the science or the tech won't work, but that it's like that they don't achieve success. So we want more base hits, so singles and doubles maybe, or triples, but probably not a single home run. Therefore, what we're trying to see is, can every deal basically get us to the multiple that on average is going to give us like a 3 to 4x return as a fund. So what we look at is, how much money are they going to have to raise over time? What's going to be enough money to get them big enough that the acquirers in their space will acquire them? So let's just pick like a food company, for example. We're seeing right now that food companies need to be about 20 million before any of the big acquirers in revenue, before the acquirers will buy them, and then like say they're buying them at a 4x multiple. So then I can calculate, okay, so maybe they're going to exit at an 80 million valuation. How much money do they have to raise along the way? At what valuations are those likely to get raised at? And so how much money do we have to put in to have enough of a percentage that when they get bought for 80 million, we're going to have a 7x return, let's say. And so we're really looking at the path of that company over the course of time, and can that company likely deliver the multiple we need so that the fund in aggregate, with assuming some fail outright, will actually deliver a good return to our customers. So it's a little more complicated, but sometimes it's as low as 3% and sometimes it's high at 10% for the first check. Okay, go for it.
I think in answering her question, you said something about if you raise capital, you almost have to have an exit strategy?
Oh, you
that
do?
is part of it. Oh, okay.
Yeah, because here's what happens. I'm putting money into your company because I want an investment return, and I don't have an infinite runway. So in a fund specifically, my fund has a 10-year life on it. So when I raise money from these people who put money in my fund, I basically owe them all their money back at the end of 10 years with some technicalities. So that means you need to have sold your company in that time or had a secondary or some other kind of, exit, which don't happen a lot.
So how will somebody pitch to you saying, how does an exit strategy look? Like how will they say it to you, saying I'm going to sell it in 5 years or?
Yeah, or so, look, you don't know, right? I mean, anything you say is just an assumption. But what you look at is, so I'll pick Epic Bar, for example, which went through the STU Accelerator. So they're a snack bar that's a protein-based snack bar instead of like a granola bar. And they got acquired by General Mills, I think. And so what they looked at is, what companies in the CPG space are acquiring new food brands that bring a differentiated point of view. There's a lot of stuff happening in plant-based foods, for example, right now. So if I were like the new version of Epic, I'd probably be like a plant-based bar. And I would look at Kraft and Kellogg and General Mills and Quaker, and I would see who else they were buying, for what rate, and how big those companies had to get. And I would tell you, okay, my potential exits are probably these companies, and here's some examples, just like in real estate, okay, so the comparable houses that have similar square footage in these similar neighborhoods are selling for X, so therefore I think my company can sell for X. You want, generally, to not just have, it's just CPG companies. You also want to say, oh, I'm collecting data around what consumers are eating, so I could also sell to Google because Google wants me for this, and have different categories of buyers and some examples of what those exits look like, so I can literally visualize that path. But you also have to want to sell your company in that time frame. The only exception I will give to that longer time frame, a lot of times family offices are trying to build wealth over multiple generations. So like the grandparents are trying to think about how their grandchildren are going to get successful, and they often maybe have more of a mission around like wanting to improve the city where they live or health, etc. And they don't have any timeline around, I need my money back in 10 years because either I'm going to die and I want to take it with me, or like I've got a fund. They may literally be thinking about a longer term horizon, and some of them will actually look at longer term investments than others, but they're really hard to find. So. Welcome.
We are in the middle of fundraising, and we had these conversations with VCs that are more interested in the Series A for us, and so they've actually told us, like, let's keep in touch, but let's chill out for a little bit. One of the questions I had was, in some of the conversations we've been having, there's this, there are lots of people that have been recommended for us to either partner with or to potentially acquire. My question is, when you're thinking about, while you're in the middle of fundraising, how common is it for people to talk about companies you're trying to position to acquire while you're in the middle of fundraising? Like, do investors want to hear that, or is that?
It seems really unrealistic at the seed stage. I mean, you've got to make your fundamentals of your business work, and honestly, you're still a startup, and so the appeal you have to other parties is pretty low because you haven't figured out your fundamentals. So that seems like an unlikely path. It's not unheard of. There have been times where two startups have merged together in order to sort of complement one another and have a more appealing positioning in the market, et cetera. But often those acquisitions or whatever are just stock exchanges. There's no cash changing hands, and really what you've decided to do is just bundle together for the people resources or the product compatibility or whatever else. But I mean, it's probably not the most likely path that you would take.
This is sort of a silly question, but you started off by saying that you've been to 54 countries in 49 states.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering which state you haven't been to.
That's a great question because I'm going there in August. So Alaska, and I'm on the board of the Texas 4000 for Cancer, which is a bunch of awesome UT student leaders who bike from Austin to Anchorage over the course of the summer and raise money for cancer awareness and hope and education, et cetera. And the students actually raise money to donate to organizations that they pick. And last year they raised $1 million, just 70 UT students, and then rode their bikes for 4,000 plus miles. So I'm going to go be at the end when they roll into town this summer, which I'm pretty excited about. So I will hit my 50th state this year. Cool. I think that's a good ending note, and I'm happy to stay around for individual questions. So thank you for listening.